She wasn't just the queen consort, she was the strategist behind the silent coup. The whispers began long before the doctors stepped into Balmoral. A flicker of unease rippled through the royal corridors, quiet at first, then louder, until it became the single truth no one dared to say aloud. Queen Camilla was tightening her grip on the crown. For decades, the former mistress-turned-monarch had played the patient game. While King Charles's health faltered, she watched, calculated, and moved the pieces of a chessboard only she could see. Those close to the palace say her methods were subtle but merciless, small exclusions from royal briefings, quiet phone calls made after midnight, and the soft silencing of anyone who stood in her way. At first, it was the aides. Long-serving staff who had once served the late Queen Elizabeth II found themselves reassigned, their offices cleared overnight. One insider described it as a cleansing polite on paper, brutal in execution. The Queen Consort's allies were installed in key positions, ensuring that when the time came, every decision would pass through her hand. But what truly ignited the firestorm was not her handling of palace politics. It was what she allegedly did when the king's health began to collapse. In early spring, Charles's public appearances grew shorter. His smile, once a mask of royal composure, now revealed a man fighting exhaustion. The palace, ever discreet, released vague statements about routine treatments and a minor condition. Yet insiders knew better. One senior physician, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that the king's prognosis was far worse than the public had been told. His condition was progressive, serious, and required constant supervision. But according to leaked correspondence between royal aides, Camilla rejected repeated recommendations for a full medical leave. She insisted that Charles continue with engagements, for the sake of stability. Some say she wanted to project control. Others believe she feared what would happen if the king officially delegated authority to the Prince of Wales. She wasn't about to let William take the reins, one courtier confessed. Not yet. Not while she could still pull the strings. Behind the grand facade of Buckingham Palace, tensions reached a breaking point. Prince William and Catherine reportedly confronted Camilla in a private meeting, urging her to allow the king to rest. What followed was a clash so intense that witnesses described voices echoing through the hallway. Camilla, as the story goes, dismissed their concerns, accusing the younger royals of power hunger and public theatrics. William stormed out, his jaw tight, while Catherine, calm but visibly shaken, allegedly told an aide later that she no longer recognized the family she married into. For the public, the facade of unity remained. For those within, it was clear. The monarchy was fracturing from the inside out. Just when the palace thought it could contain the whispers, a new controversy erupted. It began with an unconfirmed report in the Times that Princess Alexandra, one of the last living links to the Queen Mother, had quietly gifted Catherine a priceless set of jewels. Jewels once intended for the reigning queen. Camilla's fury, insiders say, was unlike anything the palace had ever seen. She demanded the return of the jewels, arguing they were state property. But Alexandra refused, insisting the gift was personal and made with the Queen Mother's blessing decades earlier. This single act, a private handover between two women, became a symbol of rebellion. For the first time, a senior royal had publicly defied Camilla's authority, and worse, sided with Catherine. Public sympathy shifted overnight. The press called it the New Windsor War, a generational power struggle between two visions of royalty, one old in scandal, stained, the other young, graceful, and unyielding. By summer, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace had turned poisonous. Leaked memos revealed a communications restructuring led by Camilla's team, aimed at streamlining the palace's narrative. In plain English, that meant silencing dissenting voices. Several staffers close to William and Catherine were dismissed or transferred. Others resigned, unwilling to work under what one called a regime of fear. Even Charles's private secretary, a loyal aide of 20 years, was reportedly forced out, replaced by a figure with close ties to Camilla's camp. Rumors spread that the Queen Consort was orchestrating a full internal takeover, preparing for a scenario where the king might no longer be fit to rule. When the king collapsed during a private meeting at Sandringham, the palace's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Despite efforts to downplay the incident, a staff member leaked details to the press. Charles had lost consciousness for several minutes. He was revived, but his health, the report said, was in rapid decline. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Hashtags like #WhereIsTheKing and #Camilla cover-up flooded social media. The British public, already weary from years of royal scandals, demanded answers. Camilla, however, appeared calm, even radiant during her next engagement, a charity gala in London. Her smile, polished and unflinching, was splashed across front pages with headlines that read, "The Queen Who Would Reign." The crown, once a symbol of stability, was now a battlefield. Within the walls of the palace, alliances were forming, secrets traded like currency. William's camp began preparing for a constitutional intervention, while Camilla's supporters whispered about a transition plan that would see her take on an unprecedented role, de facto ruler, under the guise of protecting the monarchy. Those close to the king say he was aware of the turmoil, though too weak to intervene. He knew what was happening, one aide recalled, but by the time he tried to stop it, it was already too late. As autumn descended on London, the bells of Westminster rang not for celebration, but as a warning. The monarchy was entering its darkest chapter since the abdication crisis of 1936, and at the heart of it all stood one woman smiling in pearls, holding a power no one had ever elected her to wield. It was no longer about loyalty. It was about survival. The day after the Sandringham collapse, the royal household went into lockdown. Phones were confiscated. Access to the king's private quarters was restricted to a handful of aides. No one outside that circle knew how bad things were, except perhaps one person, Prince William. He had been there that morning, summoned by an urgent call from a senior doctor. When he arrived, the image that greeted him was one he would never forget: his father, pale, trembling, and frightened, surrounded by attendants too afraid to act without permission. Permission from Camilla. "She's controlling everything," William told Catherine later that night, "even who gets to see him." In another wing of the palace, the Queen Consort was already planning the press release. "Routine fatigue," she instructed her communications officer. "Nothing serious. The king will resume duties shortly." The truth that Charles's health was deteriorating fast would remain a state secret. Within hours, the royal family split into two camps. On one side stood Camilla and her loyalists, a small but powerful faction of senior courtiers, advisors, and seasoned PR strategists, determined to protect her image at all costs. On the other stood William and Catherine, backed quietly by Princess Anne and the aging Duchess Sophie, both of whom had grown wary of the Queen Consort's tightening control. The first skirmish came over the king's medical authority. William demanded that his father's doctors report directly to him as heir and privy councillor. Camilla intervened, citing privacy. It was a battle over signatures and schedules, but in truth, it was a war for legitimacy. "She's building a wall around him," Anne told one aide, "and once it's complete, no one will be able to reach the king again." The public grew restless. The palace's vague statements no longer matched the silence from royal engagements. Reporters began digging, and before long, someone inside the walls started leaking. Photos of the king being helped into a private medical car surfaced online. The palace blamed an opportunistic paparazzi, but insiders whispered otherwise. The photo was leaked by someone who wanted the truth out. Camilla's fury was volcanic. Within 24 hours, 3 palace staffers were dismissed. Phones were searched. Even Catherine's private secretary was questioned, a move seen as an open act of aggression. "It was intimidation, pure and simple," said one witness. "They wanted everyone to know that Camilla was watching." But the Queen Consort had underestimated the tide of sympathy building for the younger royals. For the first time, the public began to side with William, seeing him not as a prince waiting for power, but as a son trying to protect his father from manipulation. The turning point came one rainy evening at Windsor Castle. William requested an audience with his father, but Camilla refused, claiming Charles was too weak. William, breaking royal protocol, pushed past the guards and entered the king's chambers anyway. The confrontation that followed was both heartbreaking and historic. Witnesses heard raised voices, William pleading for his father to rest, Camilla accusing him of betrayal. "You're destroying him," William shouted. "And you're destroying the monarchy," she fired back. Charles, frail and exhausted, tried to intervene but collapsed again before finishing his sentence. Doctors rushed in. The argument ended not with words, but with the sound of a door slamming and footsteps retreating down the corridor. By morning, the king was stable, but the family was not. Anne demanded an emergency meeting of the Privy Council. Camilla's camp pushed back, insisting there was no constitutional need. For the first time, official documents referred to temporary delegation of duties, a phrase the public had not heard since the illness of George III. Behind closed doors, William began preparing for what he privately called the inevitable. He would not allow the monarchy to become a puppet show. Catherine, calm amid chaos, urged patience. "If we move too soon," she said, "they'll call it a coup." But the prince knew time was slipping away. The machine of the monarchy, the same one that had chewed up his mother, was turning again. And this time, It was aimed at his father. Camilla made her next move in silence. A new public appearance was scheduled, a charity visit in Scotland. Cameras captured her stepping from the car, radiant, compassionate, smiling. Headlines praised her resilience. The palace, for a brief moment, seemed united again. But those who looked closer noticed something chilling. Charles was not beside her, and when asked about the king's health, Camilla's answer was carefully rehearsed. His Majesty is in good spirits and continues to perform his duties privately. It was the perfect lie, just enough truth to silence questions, but not enough to reveal the darkness behind the palace walls. Inside Windsor, William watched the broadcast in silence. His mother's portrait hung on the wall behind him, her eyes forever calm, forever knowing. He turned to Catherine. She's rewriting history while he's still alive. And in that moment, the Prince of Wales understood. The war for Windsor had begun, and this time, only one crown would survive. For the first time in modern royal history, the heir was no longer waiting, he was acting. The silence inside Windsor had become unbearable. Days passed with no word from the king. The official bulletins were short, sterile, and rehearsed. His Majesty continues to rest comfortably. But William knew better. The last time he saw his father, Charles could barely lift his hand to wave goodbye. Behind the gilded gates, the heir to the throne began to plan his own countermove, not as a son, but as the future sovereign. William's first step was gathering allies quietly, cautiously. Princess Anne joined without hesitation, her loyalty to the crown stronger than her fear of Camilla's reprisals. The Duchess of Edinburgh, Sophie, offered something even more valuable: connections. She knew which advisors were secretly disillusioned, which courtiers whispered dissent behind closed doors, and which journalists still believed in the idea of an honest monarchy. In late autumn, a small, unmarked car arrived at Windsor under the cover of fog. Inside was an investigative editor from The Guardian. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. When the man left, he carried a sealed envelope containing medical statements, schedules, and proof that the king's true condition had been hidden for months. It was the first royal leak sanctioned by an heir in modern British history. 3 days later, the Guardian headline exploded across the world. Palace deception. King Charles's health crisis concealed. The article described months of cover-ups, conflicting reports, and internal power struggles. It stopped short of naming Camilla directly, but the subtext was unmistakable. She was the architect of the silence. For the first time, public outrage was not directed at the monarchy itself, but at the woman behind the curtain. Social media burned with fury. Number Camilla cover-up. Number let William lead. Number the People's King. Buckingham Palace scrambled to respond. Camilla's team issued a denial within hours, calling the report grossly irresponsible and deeply hurtful. But the damage was done. Once the truth left the palace gates, it could never be called back. Inside the palace, the fallout was instant. Senior aides resigned. Staff whispered of legal inquiries. Even foreign diplomats began asking uncomfortable questions about who was truly in charge. For the first time, Camilla was on the defensive. She demanded a meeting with the Prime Minister, seeking reassurance that her role remained secure. But Downing Street, aware of the growing public anger, offered only silence. The message was clear: her political capital had evaporated. Meanwhile, William's quiet defiance had transformed into something larger. Advisors loyal to his mother's memory began aligning with him. Former staffers of the late Queen Elizabeth reached out privately, offering documents, records, and most importantly, credibility. Within weeks, the heir had built a small but powerful network, the Windsor Circle. Their mission was simple: to prepare for a transition not controlled by Camilla, but by truth. The confrontation everyone feared came one storm-torn evening at Clarence House. The king, weak but lucid, had requested to see both his wife and his son. What followed would later be described by one insider as the night the monarchy cracked. William arrived first, carrying a single folder of reports from the doctors, showing that Charles's illness had advanced beyond what the public was told. Camilla entered moments later, her expression cold as stone. "You went to the press," she said, voice low, trembling with rage. "I went to the truth," William replied. The king sat between them, silent, his hands shaking. "Enough," he whispered, his voice frail but heavy with command. "This family has survived wars and scandals. It will not survive this." Camilla turned away, tears glinting in her eyes, or perhaps fury. "You've let them turn you against me," she said. "Against us." But William's voice didn't waver. "I'm not against you. I'm against the lie." Outside, thunder rolled across the London sky. Inside, history shifted. For the first time, the king sided with his son. "William," he said, after a long pause, Begin the preparations, quietly. It was not a coronation decree. It was something far more significant, a signal that the era of transition had begun. Camilla left the room without a word. She would not forgive. She would not forget. And somewhere deep within Buckingham Palace, the machinery began to turn once more not toward her, but toward the man destiny had been waiting for. The next morning, William and Kate stood by the window of Kensington Palace, watching the rain soften into mist. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to breathe. The revolt had begun not with swords or crowns, but with truth. And truth, once spoken, is the one weapon no palace can contain. Power doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives in silence, when everyone is too tired to resist. The palace slept under a heavy London fog, but inside apartment 1 Ampere at Kensington, the lights still glowed. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The tea had gone cold, the fire burned low, and William and Kate sat across from each other at the small oak table that had seen every kind of conversation, joy, grief, and now, inevitability. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, the weight of the past weeks pressing down like lead. "He's stronger than you think," Kate said softly, cradling her mug. "They all are." "I know," William murmured. "But it's not just about him anymore. It's everything around him, the institution, the machine." He paused, staring into the dark swirl of his tea. "George asked me this morning why we always have to dress up so fancy. I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a child that his clothes are armor?" Kate smiled faintly, sadness in her eyes. "You tell him the truth, someday, when he's ready." William leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "It's strange, isn't it? How history never really belongs to you. You're just keeping it alive until it decides to move on." He thought of his father, frail, fading, surrounded by shadows of advisors and decisions he no longer made. Thought of his mother forever young in the world's memory, frozen in that tragic moment that defined them all. Thought of Camilla relentless, defiant, still fighting battles that should have ended long ago. "Everyone's running out of time," he said quietly, "trying to build something that will outlast them." Kate reached across the table, her hand finding his. "And maybe that's all any of us can do." I'll be a different kind of king," William said suddenly, as though the thought had been sitting in his chest for years, waiting to escape. "I don't know what that means yet, but I know I can't do it the way it's always been done. Something has to change." Kate studied him, the boy who'd walked behind his mother's coffin, the man who'd carried his family through scandal after scandal, and now the heir standing on the edge of history. "Maybe that's exactly what this family needs," she said. "Someone who remembers what it costs." For a long time, neither spoke. The house creaked. The old clock on the wall marked the hour, 1:47 a.m. The world outside was silent, but inside, the future was forming, fragile and unspoken. They rose together, moving through the quiet routines of ending the day. Checking the locks, turning off the lights, climbing the stairs side by side. William paused at George's door, listening to the steady rhythm of his son's breathing. In Charlotte's room, he adjusted her covers. In Louis's, he tucked the worn rabbit closer to his little hand. His children, his purpose, his question marks waiting to be answered. Back in their own room, Kate helped him with his cufflinks, the reverse of the morning's ritual, taking off the armor instead of putting it on. The gesture was small, but full of meaning. The prince and the princess, stripped of titles, reduced to two people who just wanted one quiet night before the storm. They changed into pajamas without speaking. The exhaustion in their bones was heavy, but so was the peace that came from being together in the silence. In bed, Kate curled against him, her head on his chest, her hand resting over his heart. "Tomorrow," William said into the darkness, "we start preparing for everything, the transition, the conversations, the change." "Tomorrow," Kate whispered. "But tonight, we just breathe. I'm Sandringham." He closed his eyes, listening to her heartbeat, the sound of the house settling around them, the soft hum of the radiator, the whisper of the rain against the window. Home. For this one night, he allowed himself to be only a husband, a father, a man. The crown wasn't on his head yet. It hovered somewhere above him, inevitable, inescapable. But tonight, its weight was suspended, held back by love, by warmth, by the small miracle of stillness. He thought of his father, alone in his study at Clarence House, of Camilla, already planning her next move, of a kingdom teetering between the past and the future, and then, finally, of his mother, the ghost who had taught him the hardest truth of all. The crown takes everything unless you remember what it's for. William tightened his arm around Kate. "Whatever comes," he whispered, "we do it together." "Always," she murmured. Outside, dawn waited beyond the fog, a new day rising for a family on the edge of history. The crown was coming, ready or not. and for now, they simply breathed the final calm before the rain began. The storm that had gathered behind palace walls finally broke. What began as whispers in drawing rooms and coded headlines in broadsheets had now turned into a full-fledged royal crisis, one that could determine not only reputations, but the very survival of the monarchy's moral authority. At the center of it all stood Duchess Sophie, calm, poised, and publicly unbothered. Yet privately, sources revealed, she was grappling with a truth that cut far deeper than court gossip. The accusations that had first targeted her as an opportunist and climber had now boomeranged toward her accusers. Evidence was surfacing that suggested the plot to discredit her was not spontaneous. It was engineered, coordinated, and funded from within the royal apparatus itself. Documents leaked to The Guardian revealed a series of discreet payments authorized by a senior royal aide linked to Queen Camilla's private office. The funds had allegedly been funneled to a former palace employee, who in turn fed tabloids selective, damaging stories about Sophie's growing closeness to King Charles. Every piece of false information had one purpose: to tarnish her credibility before her influence could solidify. It was a character assassination, orchestrated with precision. One senior courtier told the paper under anonymity. They underestimated her resilience and her quiet alliances. Those alliances, as it turned out, were formidable. Prince Edward, long seen as one of the quieter Windsors, had been quietly building a network of supporters who believed Sophie's presence represented not disruption but renewal. Even more surprisingly, Princess Anne, whose loyalty to her brother, the king, was beyond question, began to express private concerns about the manipulative tactics circulating around the Queen's circle. Behind closed doors, an extraordinary confrontation reportedly unfolded at Balmoral. King Charles, informed by his private secretary of the growing evidence, demanded an explanation from the Queen. Witnesses described the scene as icy, surgical, and devastating. Camilla, blindsided, dismissed the accusations as ridiculous court gossip, but the king's tone was colder than ever before. "This family has survived wars and scandals," he is said to have told her, "but what it cannot survive is sabotage from within." For weeks after, Camilla withdrew from public engagements, citing fatigue, but insiders whispered that her retreat was far more strategic, a pause to regroup and counter. Her loyalists began leaking new narratives, that Sophie was exploiting the king's sympathy to carve out a queen-in-waiting role, subtly undermining the official queen consort. The public, however, was no longer so easily swayed. Social media, once rife with mockery toward Sophie, began to shift. Clips of her emotional speeches, her steady presence during hospital visits, and her understated dignity went viral. The narrative was changing, from a duchess accused to a duchess wronged. But behind the media spin and the palace press briefings, the real question remained: who stood to gain the most from destroying Sophie's image? Some suspected it was not Camilla directly, but those around her courtiers whose survival depended on maintaining her power. Others whispered of a deeper, older rivalry, one that stretched back decades to the early years of Charles and Diana, when loyalty and jealousy had already drawn battle lines across the royal household. Now, the same poison seemed to be circulating again, threatening to repeat history. As winter approached, the palace found itself teetering between two futures, one ruled by fear and manipulation, the other by renewal and accountability. And as Duchess Sophie prepared for her next public appearance standing beside the king at a state dinner meant to symbolize unity, even her calm smile could not hide the storm gathering behind her eyes. Because she knew something the world did not. This battle was far from over. The truth had only just begun to surface, and when it did, it would shake the monarchy to its very foundations. The dawn that broke over Windsor Castle that morning was heavy and golden, the kind of light that felt like both an ending and a reckoning. For months, the palace had been suffocating under its own secrets, and now, the truth Sophie had carried in silence was about to explode into daylight. It began with an unexpected announcement from Buckingham Palace. The king had ordered an internal review of palace communications and staff conduct, citing a breach of trust within senior circles. To the public, it seemed a bureaucratic gesture. To those inside, it was a veiled declaration of war. Within hours, phones went dark, aides were dismissed, computers were seized. The Queen's private secretary was quietly escorted out of her office, under security supervision, the same aide whose signature appeared on the leaked financial transfers. The press, scenting blood, descended in waves. By noon, headlines blazed. Palace in crisis. Charles launches investigation into royal leaks. Queen's inner circle under scrutiny, as Sophie's name cleared. For Sophie, vindication came not with triumph, but with exhaustion. She had never wanted a public feud only to defend the truth. Yet now she found herself at the center of a constitutional earthquake. Reporters swarmed the gates of Bagshot Park, the home she shared with Prince Edward, shouting questions about betrayal and revenge. Her only answer, delivered with quiet grace, was a single sentence: "Integrity has no title, and truth needs no crown." Behind the walls of Balmoral, the fallout was brutal. Camilla's composure, once her greatest weapon, began to crack. Friends said she felt cornered and humiliated, isolated even from the king, who now kept his distance in an effort to appear impartial. But impartiality was impossible. The entire monarchy had been split into camps. Those loyal to the queen and those who believed Sophie represented a new, modern conscience, one the royal family desperately needed if it was to survive the century. Parliament began murmuring about public accountability. The Prime Minister discreetly requested updates from the palace's private office. And among the people, a rare sense of justice began to stir. Petitions circulated online urging the king to reform the royal household, while polls showed Sophie's popularity eclipsing even that of Princess Catherine. The king, exhausted and grieving the erosion of his own household, retreated to Sandringham. Insiders claimed he spent long hours alone, rereading letters from his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, about duty, restraint, and the moral weight of leadership. In one of her notes, written years before her death, she had warned, "The greatest threat to the crown will never come from the people. It will come from those who wear it without humility." It was said those words haunted Charles as he faced the ruins of his inner circle. When the investigation's final report arrived, it confirmed what many already suspected: unauthorized leaks, coordinated defamation, and deliberate manipulation of royal press briefings. Though no names were officially released, the pattern was unmistakable. The Queen's office had been complicit. That evening, in a rare televised address, King Charles appeared somber but resolute. His voice trembled only slightly as he said, "In serving the crown, we must serve truth first, and truth demands accountability, even within our own family." It was a statement both noble and devastating. Within days, Queen Camilla announced she would temporarily step back from public duties to focus on her health. But palace insiders knew it was not illness, it was exile, quiet and strategic. And so, as spring dawned over the monarchy, Duchess Sophie stood at the king's side during the Easter service at St. George's Chapel. The crowd, lining the ancient stone path, erupted in applause when she appeared. She smiled gently, not as a victor, but as someone who had survived the unthinkable. The camera flashes painted her face in bursts of light. To some, she was the duchess who restored dignity to the crown. To others, the woman who had nearly torn it apart. But to those who truly understood, she was neither hero nor villain. She was the embodiment of the truth the monarchy had long tried to bury, that even within palaces, the battle between loyalty and conscience never ends. As she walked beside the king, who now looked older, frailer, but strangely lighter, the choir began to sing Jerusalem. The melody rose like a prayer over centuries of power, pain, and privilege. In that moment, the monarchy felt suspended between past and future, its survival resting not on jewels or titles, but on the courage of a woman who had dared to face the storm and refused to be silenced. And somewhere deep within the castle halls, beneath portraits of queens long gone, the echoes of her quiet defiance lingered, a promise that truth, however buried, always finds its crown.